Coming up on today's show, I'll be chatting with actor Christina Wren, who you may know as Major Carrie Farris in Zack Snyder's Man of Steel and Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. We talk about how she was fascinated with acting from an early age, creating the Two Kids with a Camera production company with her husband, her time being a part of the LA Macabre series that's currently available on Amazon Prime, and how as an actor it's important to understand what's going on with all aspects of being on a film set. This was a really fun conversation to have, really insightful from an actor standpoint, so I don't think you can get enough of that on the show. So all of that coming up on this week's episode of the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, which starts right now. Welcome to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, where every week I take a look inside the world of film and television with those who have lived it and experienced it. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and I'm happy to be joined this week by actor Christina Wren. Christina, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, Derek. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And we were just talking a little bit before we started recording, and I feel like every interview I've done since really like late March, early April, has started with this whole conversation. We were talking about how like doing stuff remotely has just become really kind of the norm, when before it was kind of the exception. Like if it was a big deal if you had to do a virtual meeting, or even doing these podcasts. I do most of them in person, but since the pandemic hit, everything is just so virtual. It's like I'm used to watching everybody through a small screen.
Yeah, totally. It's super strange. And I always thought the technology was amazing and cool and a great resource, but I've found it now to be something that also is quite emotional, like to get to FaceTime friends or Zoom, that's our only real connection to them, and to feel like, okay, I got to see their face. I feel like we hung out, or, we were at their place, whatever. I'm so incredibly grateful. And it's made it possible to continue on with our work, which is also huge. So, obviously not the same as sitting actually in the room with another human, but yeah, can you imagine if this didn't exist? Like, it would be a totally different experience right now. Yeah.
I was having that conversation with somebody the other day, and even January and February seemed like entirely different lifetimes, because like
my gosh, yeah.
We were starting to hear about COVID overseas, and then you'd hear like, 4 or 5 cases in the entire country as far as here goes. And then March happens, and it's funny because in past conversations I've had with people on this show, they were working on projects and they literally just, shut down. I was talking with a stunt coordinator a couple of weeks ago, and he had, I think, 3 days to initially mapped out to do whatever it was that he had to do. And then the producer came up and was like, "Oh, can you do it all in one day?"
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's wild. I remember exactly what you're talking about. It almost felt like watching like the zombies coming or something. Like I just felt like you could see this wave coming, and we didn't know quite how it was going to hit us and quite how to prepare. I had one of my last experiences, really the last thing I did before going into lockdown. One of my dear friends was in the Harry Potter show in San Francisco, and she was had a big show coming up where she was playing one of the lead roles, because she like understudies a handful of the main characters. So she's going to go on as a lead. So I was like, well, great. Like, I'll drive up and see you. I was in LA, and all this stuff started happening, and we were sort of going, is this okay? Can we still go? And I remember having this feeling of, get it in now. Like, you can see it's not quite here yet, but it's coming. And everyone was sort of chatting about it and hoping we were okay and doing the right things. We still didn't quite know what this thing was and where it was going. But in hindsight, it's so strange to think about now. Like, I'm so grateful, number one, that I got to see it and have that experience before all this, but also like, I can't even hardly remember being in a room with 5 people, much less a giant theater. It's just like, to your point, a completely different world. It just feels like another existence.
Well, it's going back and watching stuff even as recent as earlier this year, watching like, football games or some type of show with a large audience, like that just looks so foreign now.
Doesn't it feel jarring even watching movies, like old movies, but when you see a bunch of people in a bar or a crowd, it's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? It's just so strange that something I couldn't have ever imagined.
Yeah.
As a person, we were watching old Pearl Jam videos on YouTube the other day, and just seeing how many people were really at a Pearl Jam concert, like smushed up on each other, you know. And now you're like, oh my gosh, the germs, but you know, we could do it. We could be together. So hopefully, again, not too far from now.
Hopefully so. Hopefully so. Which I did want to ask you, you know, as an actor and someone who works in the industry, how has the adjustment been for you, like specifically as an actor, because you know you go to all these auditions and everything. How's the adjustment been to doing things, you know, pretty much exclusively virtual?
It's definitely, you know, a mixed bag. Like our work as actors is communal, and so there is something really a little bit lonely and isolating about, you know, just kind of doing everything from home. I'm a part of a theater troupe, and we do something called Monday Night Playground. So, you know, we're doing it online now, and I'm so grateful for that. It really fills my spirit, but it's not the same as being in a theater with, you know, my comrades. In terms of auditioning, like thankfully my husband and I are filmmakers, and self-tapes are something I was always pretty set up to do. But I have friends for whom it's like almost knocked them out of the game, you know, because it's just not how they're wired, and they live alone, and, you know, they have to like go somewhere to a studio and rent space and have someone do it with them and read with them. And that can be pretty complicated if you don't have that right setup. I've been doing almost entirely voiceovers. And so it's been, which is really quite fun. I like doing voiceovers a lot, but so I've been doing a lot of like recording auditions in my closet just to have, you know, like good space. I then, like, when I've booked them, I've mostly recorded from home. And so, like, you know, using just softwares that we can communicate with the client and stuff. I did one in a studio that was like, you know, all the COVID precautions in place, and the directors and everyone were just zooming in on video. So even that, like, going into the studio is still a pretty isolated experience, but thankfully there was still that engagement with the creative team. So I could see them. I couldn't see them the whole time, but, like, you know, they're flashing in, so I can at least sort of get a read. Because also it's interesting doing the voiceover recordings when you can't see them when you're in your home studio, and then like one person just sort of taps in and gives you feedback, which is great, and usually it's affirming and useful. But there's a little part of me that's always like, I wish I could see everyone in the room, because sometimes you can just glean the vibe. Like, are they really happy with this and they think it's funny, or like they think this is annoying, or I don't know. You know, you just can't have that human read on things that we gain so much in communication beyond just, you know, the word choices that we make. So we miss out on that. But yeah, like, luckily for me, it's funny. Like, I may have worked more in the last year than I have for a while, which is sort of strange. But my husband and I made a short film that was really quite fun. And we had everyone, it was early on in the quarantine experience. So we're just like, all right, let's go make something. So everyone filmed themselves at home, and we directed via Zoom, and then they sent us their takes, and Dimitri has cut it together. And, you know, he's writing a screenplay now that we're hoping to film in March. That's, you know, just basically us and one other actor, and it's very futuristic. So, you know, people's faces are covered for different reasons. And so we've been able to, in the words of Daniel Tiger, turn it around and find something good. But I'm so hungry to be back with community. You know, like, I don't hunger for auditions. Like, I don't need to drive across town and get all dolled up for like 5 seconds saying I'll eat a hamburger. But I really do miss working with my community.
Well, I'm sure as a performer, and you mentioned being part of a theater troupe, I'm sure that you miss the feedback or the emotion that you get from the audience and how they react to what you want to do. I'm sure that's got to be a huge adjustment.
It is. It's funny you say that, because the piece we did the other day, and I usually, like, I don't know, I'm not usually, with this group at least, self-conscious at all. Like I've worked with them for a very long time, and it goes well, and I enjoy myself, and I get good feedback. But for some reason, I think because it was this like very kind of profound and very emotional piece, that was also, I think, kind of intensely personal for the people who made it. And I just really felt like, oh gosh, did it land? Like I know I ended up in this, deeply emotional place, and I hope it was as real for other people as it was for me, or something. Like, it was weird to have those kind of insecurities creep in, because if I was in the room with people, I would have been able to see if they were crying, if they were shielding their face with horror, I mean, whatever it is, like, you would know. So yeah, you're just kind of talking to your computer screen, hoping someone is enjoying themselves on the other side. But,
yeah, and also I think one of the positive aspects of this whole crisis that we've been going through is it has in a way forced people who work in the industry, and even part of my day job, to be more creative with things. And I've mentioned this before too, is that I think once things start to get back to normal, I think we're going to see this huge surge in creativity with indie filmmakers, because those who write can still write at home. And those who
tons of scripts being developed right now.
Yeah, so I think once things start to open back up and be more to what we consider to be normal, there's going to be this gigantic wave of creativity. You're going to hear about all these different projects from all over the country and even all over the world. So that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also, like, I'm fascinated by what this is inspiring in people. I'm really curious to see the types of stories that come out of this global cultural experience. It'll be pretty fascinating to see how it's also shifted our sort of collective creative psyche as well.
For sure. So kind of backtracking a bit, what was it that initially made you want to become an actor? Was it something that you knew from an early age? Like, what was it that sparked that interest in you?
Yeah, it's funny. So I, as long as I can remember having seen a television, I wanted to jump inside the screen. Like, I was so jealous of any kid who was like on Sesame Street or visited Mr. Rogers, or like the kids in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I just was like, oh, that's the coolest thing ever. But I just thought that's how every kid felt. Like, I didn't know that was at all distinct or something about me. And I always thought, and I like still have this thing that I fight with, which is so strange, but of just being like, I'll never have a chance to do that. I'll never get to, where I grew up in Pittsburgh, there was no industry there. There is now, but growing up, I mean, that was so, Hollywood was like the farthest thing away from this, fading blue collar town that was a former steel town, And so when I was in second grade, my mom took me to a children's theater production that her friend's kid was in. And again, I was so jealous. It was Godspell. And I remember in particular this one scene, they all put on these white gloves and did this like black light dance. And I just was holding onto my seat because I wanted to run up on the stage so bad and be with those kids. And I knew I didn't know what they were doing. I hadn't rehearsed with them, but I wanted to be a part of it so badly. And I thought like, oh, I'll never get to do that. And my mom looked at me after the show and she said, hey, Christina, is that something, you would like to do? And it was like Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, magic fairy, like bestowing all the things on me at once. But she says she had never seen me that focused on anything before. And I guess, for a pretty like rambunctious 8-year-old to sit through a 2.5 hour performance, just like riveted for her. She recognized that there was an interest there. And so I started doing children's theater and I did it as a hobby my whole life. But again, I never thought of it as a career option. In my junior year of high school, my English teacher kept telling me I had to sign up for this Governor's School for the Arts, which was a summer arts program for Pennsylvania kids. And I was super intimidated. I was like, no way. Like, I'm a public city school kid. We have no arts funding. There's no way I can compete with all the kids who've had like dance teachers and voice coaches and whatever their whole life and like fancy production budgets at their schools. And so he was so mad at me. He would check in every day because he had seen me in the little, school productions and stuff. And he said, You check in, did you get an application? Did you get an application? And I never had. So one day he shows up, he went to the office for me and grabbed it, like, God bless this man. And he set it down on my desk and he was like, you're applying. So I applied, and then it was a similar thing. I got a call back for it, and then I panicked. And I had chosen a monologue, but didn't prepare. And I was just like, I'm not going to go. I can't, I'm not ready. I'm not going to go. I can't do it. And my mom, who knew me well, she goes, well, if you can't handle it, then don't go. And it got under my skin so bad. So I went down in the basement. I learned this Joan of Arc monologue. And that experience that summer I got in, and that was the first time I really experienced what this might look like as a proper craft, as like a life practice versus, doing my High School Musical and community theater. And it was the first time I had like real coaching and teaching on a deeper level. And I loved it. It was such a meaningful experience. I felt purpose in it. And still sort of didn't know where my place was. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I was a good student. I was like, okay, I should go to school for something, responsible, but like, maybe I'll minor in theater okay, I'll major in English. Okay, I'll major in Spanish. I'll major, like, it just, whatever it was kept changing, but I'll minor in theater. Okay, I'll double major in theater. Okay, whatever. And finally, my parents encouraged me to just pursue acting, which, is unlike, I know, a lot of people's experiences, but it was really them kind of nudging me in that direction that gave me the courage and the strength to do it. And so then I studied performance in college, and then, have stuck with it ever since. But it's still like, it's funny. I mean, I was at the playground pushing my kids on the swings the other day, and my dad's asking me about my career. I'm like, well, we'll see. I don't know, and he's like, you're in this, don't give it up. Don't, so that's kind of, I guess, been my journey the whole time, the ebb and flow of that. Artists were sensitive types, but yeah, so it's always been in me, but I didn't have what some people have of like, I'm going to grow up and do that, and I'm going to be a star or something, like, it was more just an affection for the craft and for the work.
But the good thing is you did have that support system, that they saw something in you that, they knew you wanted to do it. So to have, people who care enough to push you to do something like that is something that a lot of people don't have. So I think that's super important.
Grateful. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be doing this, truthfully, if it weren't for them. I didn't have the confidence in it. I mean, who knows? Maybe I would have stumbled and found my way out of, enough dissatisfaction and other things. But it's definitely them and their very generous support that has kept me, on the path for so long.
Well, I think it can also be a big motivating factor too, because if you have someone who believes strongly enough to push you to do something, it kind of makes you think, okay, well, maybe, there is something there that, they realize things about you that you don't. So I think that's great.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
They're pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, once you decide, okay, this is what you want to do, how did you ultimately get your foot in the door? Because you mentioned that you also have your own production company, right?
Yeah, and that is really how things happened. So when I was in college, I had a minor in Pan-African Studies, and I had spent my final semester in South Africa. And I knew that I wanted to get back. And I had also I grew up on the north side of Pittsburgh, and my family was really a community development, like sort of invested in the world that I grew up in. And that was always a part of who I was. And so when I graduated, I got a grant to do this production back in Pittsburgh on the north side, where we were doing devised theater based on the oral histories of the local community. And so I did these video interviews with older members of the community who had been around for generations, and then did a live hip hop theater production with the students, and like younger people in the community. And then we put them together to have their voices in conversation. And so fast forward to, I had met and worked with this guy named Demetrius a few times right after I had gotten back from South Africa. So he knew that that had been part of my journey. And I was at this fundraiser event one night for an arts collective that a friend of mine ran. And I was running the door for her, and he comes in, he's like, hey, I'm going back to South Africa. I'm making a documentary. And I had just quit my full-time job to be a full-time artist like 2 days before. So it was like, it's a sign. So I basically leapt out of my skin and was like, hey, do you need someone to get papers signed or carry your bags or whatever? Like, I will, be your assistant for nothing, but can I get back to South Africa and help? He said, actually, yeah, my exec's coming to town next week to interview for a producer. And because I had, lived in South Africa and I had done this type of interview work within a community context and stuff, it was a good fit. And so about a month later, I was on a plane to South Africa with this guy who I'd met like 4 times, who's now my husband. But we went and made this documentary. And that was also my first time like really learning filmmaking, because I went to school for acting. So I learned a lot from him and on the job. And then after that, we formed a company, 2 kids with a camera, and we started taking on just, like small clients here and there, and then making our own work. So I wrote this little indie feature, Saudage, and we got, a bunch of friends to be involved. And that's what actually ultimately kind of kicked off my career on a larger scale, because the guy we cast opposite from me, Adam David Thompson, was working at a commercial casting office at the time, and they couldn't find a girl for this hummus commercial. So he's like, I think my friend Christina could do it. So I come in for this audition, end up booking it, and Zack Snyder sees that commercial, and I get called in to audition for Man of Steel. So it's like this, ridiculous, crazy string of events, but that very much sort of came from making my own work and kind of, learning on the go, and then it bleeding over into the more, I don't know, Hollywood career space that at some point you want to get your toes into.
Well, and that's actually really fascinating in the sense that you quit your day job, which that takes a ton of courage in itself to do in order to pursue this career, and then it ultimately works out. How was it learning? Because you mentioned you met your husband, and then you started learning the filmmaking side of things as opposed to just acting. How was that experience? Because I tell people that I think it's important for everyone who works in the industry, no matter what position you do, you should at least have an idea of what the other jobs entail. Like those who act should learn how things work behind the camera or in post-production, and vice versa on every aspect. So how was that experience for you, and do you think that that's important as well?
I do think it's super important. I had done 1 semester at NYU's Film and Television Studio. And there, so we had done, various forms of on-camera acting. And then we also had to, work the camera for each other, or do like, learn Foley and like use a bottle of water to like make someone's back break. So I had at least like learned little bits of filmmaking to have some sort of understanding of that. But I think it is so important. I can tell on set immediately an actor who has no idea what goes on behind the scenes, because they're so self-conscious. Like if they want to do another take, it's always like, what did I do wrong? Oh my God. Because we're sensitive. We, we put our whole selves in the work. But if you're aware of like, oh, they didn't pull focus, or props wanted to do whatever, or, they wanted something wider, whatever, like you can tell what's going on around you. And it, in a theater, the actor is very much like the sort of center of it all. The actors carry the show. In a film, quite frankly, you're a pretty small piece of the whole puzzle. And being aware of that, I think, is really significant, and just understanding like, this is the part of the machine that I am, and let me nail it, because it's a very complex machine, and nobody's got time for me to like do my rehearsal on set, so show up prepared and pay attention and know your technique and all of that. But also I do think it just helps a lot to understand technically where you go, and like why you need to be precise about being consistent, or about, exactly like if a director angles you in a certain way, like be there, do that. We were filming our show Hicksters with a woman who's a fantastic actor, but completely just a theater background. And she could not understand why she had to keep like facing the actor she was talking to. She's used to being on stage where you should turn out to the audience. So we had done her coverage and we're trying to do an over the shoulder to get this other character. And she would just want to turn to the camera and deliver her lines. And it was one of those things, like we just couldn't get it to click in her brain how it worked. And like she was, again, like a wonderful actor and delightful to work with. But it was one of those things, like it can be really hard in the moment. You don't necessarily have time to teach a whole, acting for the camera class. So as much experience as you can get and as much understanding of how all the different moving parts of a film set work. I mean, it'll be like butter. If you show up and you're an actor and you're like, this is what I do, this is where I go, this is how I fit, like people will want to call you back,
Well, and you bring up a great point too, in the sense that you mentioned about an acting for the camera class. As great as some classes are, and I think they're great at teaching the foundation of things, but you can't replicate the on-the-job training. And yeah, you might screw up a few times, but sometimes like the best way to learn is to try something and it doesn't work, or you do something wrong that you may not, you may be unconsciously unaware of it. But I think on-the-job training is the best.
And that's why too, like everybody's got a camera in their pocket now. There's no reason to not, if you have even a like remote interest in this, go out with your buds, you can do it yourself, like make something. You will learn so much so fast. The best way to find out where your flaws are is to make a movie and go, oh, that's why having good mics is important. That's, why you need this type of thing to be able to edit well, whatever it is. Like, let it be a mess, as you learn on your own playing. And because you can, like, that's a thing that for so long no one had access to. You had to have like, big financiers to even get your hands on a camera. So I so join you in encouraging people to like just do it, get out there and learn.
That's the only way you're going to know, is if you just go out and do it. And like you said, everyone has, they have an iPhone, they have some other type of phone that you can make something with. So I highly recommend that as well. But you also mentioned that Zack Snyder saw you in a commercial, and then that's how you ultimately land a role on Man of Steel, and then also Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So what was your experience like being on set of those two films? Because they were both, the hype around both of them, were huge at the time. So how was it being a part of that process?
Oh my gosh, it was like the most, fun thing ever. It was so great. It was so thrilling. I had been a huge Superman fan myself growing up. Superman was a very iconic character in our childhood, really, like more so than any other superhero. And I loved all of them, despite like bad feedback. I mean, Christopher Reeve, Lois and Clark, like if there was a Superman, like I was on it. And so when I found out that the untitled Warner Brothers project that I had auditioned for was Superman, I like couldn't believe it. I lost it. So that alone was amazing. But I had also been such a huge fan of Zach's work from 300, and it was a piece that I very specifically wanted to, like, similarly to my childhood experience, and I hadn't had that much since then, but like I wanted to jump in the screen of it, and was angsty and like mad that I hadn't been in the scene when they were making that movie. And I just so vividly remember being like, oh, I want to do that, like not just be in a movie, not just like that, I really like specifically that. And so the fact that they were those two things coming together really did kind of blow my mind. And I'm sure that's not the most, like, who doesn't want to work with Zack Snyder and on Superman, but it did feel very personal. And then it was fantastic. Like, the cast and crew couldn't have been more welcoming and kind and delightful to work with. And it was, of course, a masterclass just watching everyone work, and I got such a kick out of, just watching, like, Richard Schiff and Chris Maloney and Harry Lennox just banter and tell all their stories. And, watching Amy Adams in the room is incredible. And just all of it, Henry Cavill is such a sweetheart. He was just really quite lovely to work with. And he wasn't so famous yet, so he could get away with like going out for a beer with us afterwards and just hanging. And so that was fun. It was just really quite special and quite fun, and an honor to be a part of a piece of history too. These are kind of landmark pieces in our cultural iconography and film history and such. And so it was really, they're memories that I treasure quite deeply.
And you mentioning how Superman's a part of really American culture, and regardless of what the feedback might be on some of the Superman movies or even the shows, anytime that a project involves that character, it's a huge deal and garners attention, regardless of, what the end result may be or what, some people might think of it or whatever the case may be. When you hear, that name, everyone's drawn attention to it. And I thought Henry Cavill was a fantastic Superman, and I hope he gets to play the role again.
Yeah, he's great. He's really great.
So as we start to wrap up here, what are some other projects that you have coming up in the works? I know you mentioned, you have your production company. Do you have anything out currently or things that you're working on in the future that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so one thing that just came out that I'm super excited about is called Macabre, and it's written and directed by a dear friend, Dan Ast, and it's this incredible deep dive into an underground cult scene in Los Angeles, and it's a murder mystery. It's the thriller. Dan has spent the last, maybe decade of his life, like deep in researching and learning about the sort of historic cult scene in LA and in some, surrounding areas. And he has created this world that is so believable. When I first read this script, I for sure was like, oh, my waiters and waitresses in the valley must be being lured into cults. Like, it felt like this thing that really could have evolved into this community. And season 1, he did this great thing where it was sort of a reality TV show and found footage world. And then the second season moves into a much more highly produced thing. And the man is like a writing genius. He showed up like with the 3 seasons like this fat and plopped him on the table, because he basically wrote 3 feature scripts in a row. It was all by himself, like no writer's room or anything like that. He just kind of holed up and focused in on it. And it's a really fun ride. So it's on Amazon now, so go check that out. L.A. Macabre. I play a hacker chick named JP who's like super ballsy, and she's courageous, she's honorable, she's a little feisty. She plays a sort of side love interest to one of the main characters, Ryan. And it was such a delight to get to play really quite fun things I get to do in season 2. So I don't want to spoil anything, but it was quite fun. And then if you want to check out any of my stuff, the short that I made during quarantine is called Lazaretto, and it is on my website, twokidswithacamera.com. We released it exclusively on a social media platform called Vero, which is a really wonderful community of people just genuinely sharing the things that they're interested in and love and believe in. Lots of Zack Snyder fans on Vero. So if you're into that world and that space, it's a good place to be. But it's great for everyone. So we released it on Vero. If you join the platform, you can get they had like some interview content and things like that you'll have access to, but you can watch it no matter what. So on the main page of twokidswithacamera.com, it's spelled out TWO, kids with a camera. And then the piece that we'll be shooting in March, I don't want to give too much away, but it's basically set in the future when the world, Earth has become unlivable and humans have all moved onto these satellites surrounding Earth. And something goes wrong and the satellites all combust, and this one woman gets plunged back to Earth and has to figure out how to survive. So my husband's writing it, Demetrius, and he's been deep in like Castaway and The Revenant and things where someone's on a pretty solo mission. So I feel very honored and excited that he is entrusting this to me. I'm really excited to see. My parents have agreed to watch the children so we can go make a movie, which is quite thrilling right now during quarantine. So yeah, I would say that's probably the highlight of what's going on right now.
That's fantastic. No, a lot of good stuff in the works. That's exciting.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's a good time.
What type of advice, or if you had one piece of advice to give to an aspiring actor, what would it be?
Figure out who you are, which is, of course, an ever-evolving thing. But by that, try to pinpoint what your values are. What are your things that you care most deeply about? What makes you laugh? What makes you cry? What do you care about putting out into the world? What do you think your gifts are? Pinpoint those things and go deep with them. This is such it's an oversaturated field, like especially for certain types, like, if you are a very distinct type, all the more reason also to like lean deep into it. But you have to figure out what is distinctly you, because that is the thing no one else can bring to the table, can bring to a role, can bring to the work. And then also, Amy Adams is the one who said to me about moving to LA that it's demoralizing. So, and it can be. And that's why also you need to know who you are at your core and what you most value, because there's so many voices that will try to tell you who you are and what you are and aren't, and what you're worth or what you are not worth, and all the things that you need to change. There are people who love to try and like get a piece of you by shattering your sense of self. There's just a lot of weird stuff that can go on in this field. And so you need to really be able to kind of at the end of the day say, okay, maybe I was thrown about like this, but how do I try to anchor back in? And what am I willing to sacrifice and what am I not, for this? And then train, practice your craft, practice, whether it's, getting together with your friends and your own materials and just working and practicing. There's a million amazing, master classes online, these incredible interviews with fabulous actors, and there's just so many resources, so many ways to learn. If you can get in, to a class that, working with other actors in person when that opens back up, like, that's a really meaningful experience if you got a good teacher. But it is a craft. It is something that we have to practice and train at and get better at. But the best work that we can do also comes from deep within. So the more life experiences that you have, the more diverse and interesting and distinct life experiences that you have, like not just hanging out with other actors all the time, but where do you live? What do you know that other people don't know? What worlds can you talk about, and characters can you represent, and like stay in touch with that? I think that those are the things that are, the most interesting to watch, and the things that will ultimately like lure people in and make them go, oh my gosh, like who is that? What is that they're doing? Where are they from? The advice when I was coming up used to be to basically strip yourself of anything that was distinctly you so that you could be a blank slate and play any character. Having that ability is great. And I still think that being able to sort of wipe the slate clean when you are trained to then create any character from within is so significant and important. But don't lose all those pieces of yourself in the process, you know? So it's not that you want to come in and just like play yourself all the time, but you don't want to, you know, lose what roots you in truth. Does that make sense? That was very rambly.
No, absolutely. No, I loved it. That was all great advice. Okay. Really good stuff.
Well, hopefully, yeah.
No, it definitely was. But last thing before we get out of here, do you have, you mentioned your website. Do you have any social media that you'd like to plug so the listeners can follow you?
Sure. On Instagram, I am Christina Wren. On Vero, I think I am also just Christina Wren. Twitter, I'm Christina S. Wren. I'm not super active on Twitter, but I like to fantasize that I would be one day. But most places to interact with me would be, either to check out my work at twokidswithacamera.com or on Instagram or Vero.
Fantastic.
Would love to see you guys out there. Yeah.
For sure. Well, Christina, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. This was fantastic.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. This was a delight.
Thanks again to Christina Wren for coming on the show for that really fun and really insightful conversation. Be sure to follow her on social media and check out LA Macabre, now available on Amazon Prime. For next week's show, I'll be chatting with casting director and fellow podcaster Jamie Beebe, and this is a fun conversation for me because I've never interviewed a casting director before, and over the last couple of months, I've really been trying to understand the business side of filmmaking because, you know, we know about the actors, the directors, but there's a whole other side to the film industry that I feel like isn't really talked about that much. So that's part of my effort to do so. So we'll be having that fun conversation right here next week on the podcast. But until then, you can check out past episodes of this show on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast. Just search for The Derek Diamond Experience. And if you could, please leave me a review. The more reviews I get, the more visible I become to the podcasting public. You can also follow me on Patreon at patreon.com/DDiamondPodcast if you want early access to episodes, if you want the opportunity to ask guests of the show a question, and vote on show topics. Yeah, I do fun monthly roundtables here on the show, and you can decide that by heading over to patreon.com/DDiamondPodcast. If you want to follow me on social media, same thing, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at DDiamondPodcast. And, of course, thank you to my close friends, the Unicorn Wranglers, for providing the theme music for the podcast. You can check out all their music on Apple Music, Google Play, and Spotify. That's going to do it for this week's show. So enjoy the rest of your week. Have a safe and fun weekend. Thank you for tuning in to another awesome episode of the Derek Diamond Experience. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and we'll see you guys back here next Thursday.